So, this is going to be very little edited. This is not scripted or even like vaguely planned out the way my videos usually are. It wasn't planned. I started reading J.K. Rowling's piece that she put out to defend her transphobic shit, and I got 2 sentences into it and was filled with so much like white hot rage. I was like, oh, I'll reply to this in like a tweet and just point out why she's wrong. And then she was wrong about so many things in so many ways in the first like 2 sentences that I was like, I'm not going to be able to do that. I have to answer every point as it comes, and if I do that in writing, it's going to be an essay, so it's so much easier to do it like this. This is going to be really incoherent. I'm so sorry. Okay. So, I'm reading it on my laptop, it's down here, so I'm going to look down. I'm so angry. I'm really... Okay, alright, okay. I'm really angry. I'm vibrating. I'm so upset. Okay. J.K. Rowling writes about her reasons for speaking out on sex and gender issues. Warning, this piece contains inappropriate language for children. Oh, you mean bigotry? I'm not even the first sentence. Okay. This isn't an easy piece to write for reasons that will shortly become clear, but I know it's time to explain myself on an issue surrounded by toxicity. Yeah, yours. I write this without any desire to add to that toxicity. Do you, Joanne? Are you sure? 2 sentences. For people who don't know, last December I tweeted my support for Maya Forstater. I presume that's how her name's pronounced. I also don't care because she's transphobic. A tax specialist who lost her job for what were deemed transphobic tweets. Transphobic is in air quotes, despite them actually being transphobic. Anyway. She took her case to an employment tribunal, asked the judge to rule on whether a philosophical belief that sex is determined by biology is protected in law. Judge Taylor ruled that it wasn't. My interest in trans issues predated Maya's case by almost 2 years, during which I followed the debate around the concept of gender identity closely. I've met trans people and read sundry books, blogs and articles by trans people, gender specialists, intersex people, psychologists, safeguarding experts, social workers, doctors, etc., etc. This is like the equivalent of saying all lives matter to a black person because you have a black friend. This is... oh my god. Okay. She goes on to talk about herself a bit more and why she's interested in the concept of trans issues for like a couple sentences. And then... So this is the paragraph where I stopped reading. This is the bit where I stopped. All the time I've been researching and learning, accusations and threats from trans activists have been bubbling in my Twitter timeline. This was initially triggered by a like. When I started taking an interest in gender identity and transgender matters, I began screenshotting comments that interested me, as a way of reminding myself what I might want to research later. On one occasion, I absentmindedly liked instead of screenshotting. That single like was deemed evidence of wrongthink, and a persistent low level of harassment began. Here's the thing. So, around the same time as I'm pretty sure that was happening, Mark Hamill did a similar thing. He either liked or retweeted, I think it was a like, something to do with that same or a very similar situation, and people called him out on it, and he then went and, like, did research on the situation and was like, oh, fuck, you're right, I took that totally out of context, I liked it on the basis of what I thought was, like, a normal... like standard piece of conversation. You pointed out that it wasn't, and it actually came from a transphobic person. My bad, I apologize. And, like, immediately. And then that situation was done and no one ever bothered Mark Hamill about it again. Because Mark Hamill is what? A good person. Months later, I compounded my accidental like crime by following Magdalene Burns on Twitter. Magdalene was an immensely brave young feminist and lesbian who was dying of an aggressive brain tumour. I followed her because I wanted to contact her directly, which I succeeded in doing. However, as Magdalene was a great believer in the importance of biological sex and didn't believe lesbians should be called bigots for not dating trans women with penises, dots were joined in the heads of Twitter trans activists and the level of social media abuse increased. Okay. Firstly, you're a billionaire with a huge social platform that millions of people across the world pay attention to and will see. So if you wanted to contact her directly, you didn't need to follow her on Twitter to do that. You could have had some people reach out, or even if you did need to follow her on Twitter to do that, you could have then, I don't know, just like thinking off the top of my head, explained it to people at the time. Anyway. Also, hang on, no, I can't get past this. Magdalene was a great believer in the importance of biological sex and didn't believe lesbians should be called bigots for not dating trans women with penises. That is transphobia. It just fucking is. Trans women are women. It is not my place to go into the intricacies of various sections of trans history and trans biology and why you can be a woman with a penis or be a trans person who doesn't want a penis. That is up to them. That's their decision. It's part of something that they have to decide whether they want, like, incredibly invasive, expensive, usually, like, surgery that's, like, life-altering, that will change your hormones, change your balance, or whether they are still a woman, but they want to live, or don't even have a choice and have to live with a penis anyway. Either way, whether they keep it or they don't, that doesn't make them less of a woman. Sorry. It just doesn't. I mention all this to explain that I knew perfectly well what was going to happen when I supported Maya. I must have been on my 4th or 5th cancellation by then. I expected the threats of violence, to be told I was literally killing trans people with my hate, to be called cunt and bitch, and of course for my books to be burned, although one particularly abusive man told me he'd composted them. I don't even have anything to say to that. You expected to be told that you were literally killing trans people with your hate. You expected that, and you fucking did it anyway. Here's the thing. Okay, sorry. You are an incredibly influential person. So, like, if, let's say Rick Riordan, because he's the most unproblematic person I can think of right now, who's also an author of a children's series. Okay, let's say Rick Riordan. Let's say he one day woke up this week and decided to tweet out that all lives matter, that the cops are right, that Trump is in the right, and that he thinks the Black Lives Matter movement is a bunch of hokey because, you know, whatever. That black people are somehow lesser because of the colour of their skin. That would be literally killing black people with his hate. Because he, a person with a huge amount of influence over not only just people in general, but especially children, is feeding the idea into their mind that someone that they look up to thinks it's okay to see one section of humanity as lesser, and that will worm its way into their brain, and they will grow up with that, regardless of whether it's conscious or not. When someone that you look up to tells you something as an absolute fact, or implies something, or just doesn't imply otherwise, as a child, and even as an adult now, it's hard to get through that. When someone you trust implicitly or look up to tells you something, your immediate thought is not to go, well, that can't be right. Your immediate thought is, well, I trust and look up to this person, so I will value their opinion. The more you spread this hate, the more you pass on this message that trans people are not people, that they don't... The more you spread this, the more likely it is that more people, young people, will start to think it too. And that will kill trans people, whether intentionally, directly, or not, it will. It fosters a culture of hate. What I didn't expect in the aftermath of my cancellation was the avalanche of emails and letters that came showering down upon me, the overwhelming majority of which were positive, grateful, and supportive. They came from a cross-section of kind, empathetic, and intelligent people, some of them working in fields dealing with gender dysphoria and trans people who are all deeply concerned about the way a socio-political concept is influencing politics, medical practice, and safeguarding. They're worried about the dangers to young people, gay people, and about the erosion of women's and girls' rights. Oh my god. Above all, they're worried about a climate of fear that serves nobody, least of all trans youth, well. I'd stepped back from Twitter for many months, both before and after tweeting support for Maya, because I knew it was doing nothing good for my mental health. I only returned because I wanted to share a free children's book during the pandemic. Immediately, activists who clearly believe themselves to be good, kind, and progressive people swarmed back into my timeline, assuming a right to police my speech, accuse me of hatred, call me misogynistic slurs, and, above all, as every woman involved in this debate will know, TERF. If you didn't already know, and why should you, TERF is an acronym coined by trans activists which stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. In practice, a huge and diverse cross-section of women are currently being called TERFs, and the vast majority have never been radical feminists. Oh my god! That's not a good thing! saying, being like, oh, people who call other people TERFs, the people they're calling TERFs aren't even radical feminists. Yeah, because TERFs aren't. They're not radical feminists. TERFs aren't feminists at all. Oh boy, okay, it's fine. Examples of so-called TERFs range from the mother of a gay child who was afraid their child wanted to transition to escape homophobic bullying, to a hitherto totally unfeminist older lady who's vowed never to visit Marks and Spencer's again because they're allowing any man who says they identify as a woman into the women's changing rooms. Ironically, radical feminists aren't even trans-exclusionary. They include trans men in their feminism because they were born women. Yes! It's really sexist and horrible! Oh my god! Okay, no, okay. It's really sexist, it's really transphobic. Examples of so-called TERFs range from the mother of a gay child who's afraid the child wanted to transition to escape homophobic bullying. If that child was saying they wanted to transition and she thought it was because it was to escape the homophobic bullying, first of all, you don't know much about bullying. Because, like, I don't know how much you know about trans people and statistics of bullying, but fucking hell, it's high. And second of all, if the kid had said he wanted to transition to avoid the homophobic bullying, specifically, then maybe sit down and have a conversation with him about the fact that trans people get bullied more than gay people, just as much. It's not a competition, but, like, both of those groups of people are horrifically marginalised and bullied growing up. And then a totally unfeminist old lady who's vowed never to visit Marks and Spencer's again because they're allowing any man who says they identify as a woman into the women's change rooms. Yeah, they're not saying they're allowing them into the women's change rooms, like, with other women, because usually Marks and Spencer's, they're, like, single change room blocks, right? Like, you don't go in with other people and get naked. In fact, they strongly don't like that. As someone who once went in with a friend of mine so she could help me zip up a dress, and the Marks and Spencer's person who was on the change rooms thought that I was hooking up with my friend, and was like, only one of you's allowed in there at a time. You know, because that's how rules work. Anyway. But accusations of turfery have been sufficient to intimidate many people, institutions, and organisations I once admired, who are cowering before the tactics of the playground. They'll call us transphobic! They'll say I hate trans people! What next? They'll say you've got fleas? Speaking as a biological woman, a lot of people in positions of power really need to grow a pair. I'm not going to throw my laptop. I'm not going to throw my laptop across the room. I'm not going to do it. I'm not even going to touch that. Fucking hell. So why am I doing this? Why speak up? Why not quietly do my research and keep my head down? Well, I've got 5 reasons for being worried about the new trans activism and deciding I need to speak up. 5?! It's fine. Okay. Firstly, I have a charitable trust that focuses on alleviating social deprivation in Scotland with a particular emphasis on women and children. Among other things, my trust supports projects for female prisoners and for survivors of domestic and sexual abuse. I also fund medical research into MS, a disease that behaves very differently in men and women. It's been clear to me for a while that the new trans activism is having, or is likely to have, if all demands are met, a significant impact on many of the causes I support because it's pushing to erode the legal definition of sex and replace it with... Again, this isn't my fucking place to explain this to a grown-ass woman with the money and resources to learn it herself, but fucking here we are! Sex, your biological sex, is what you were born with. It's, you're born as a woman, or you're born as a man, or you were born as somebody with both. And at some point, someone, usually your parents, will make a decision as to which gender they decide they want you to be, or if they're good parents, they'll leave it until you decide what gender you want to be, right? That's the basic definition of sort of sex. Gender is the list of social attributes that we as a society prescribe to each sex. So, like, as a woman, I should want to be a mother, and I should like girly things, and the colour pink, and I have a specific place in society. And those are the basic ones, but then there's also the sort of intrinsic, terrifying social norm ones, like how women are expected to raise children once they've had them, rather than the man be expected to, you know, raise the children once the woman has done all the work of having them, and things like that. Like, just intrinsic societal problems, right, that all women face, which is what feminism was created to get rid of, right? Same with men. There are toxic male gender stereotypes as well, and it's all bad, right? Gender should not be it's a spectrum, okay? It should not be 2 rigid sets of ideas that we cling to like it's still the fucking 50s. But Anyway, that's not the point. Sex and gender are different things, and they're not trying to replace the legal definition of sex. They're just trying to get themselves and their legal definition of sex changed to represent the sex they actually are, not the one on their birth certificate. It's really not that hard. The second reason is that I'm an ex-teacher and the founder of a children's charity, which gives me an interest in both education and safeguarding. Like many others, I have deep concerns about the effects the trans rights movement is having on both. Education and safeguarding? Or you mean educating people about trans rights and then safeguarding those trans people against bullying? Yeah, that'd be great. The third is that, as a much-banned author, I'm interested in freedom of speech and have publicly defended it, even unto Donald Trump. That's not a good thing to bring up in your argument about why you're right, is it? Like, I mean, I am also a proponent of free speech, but the whole point of free speech is that, like, people mistake the point of free speech all the time. Free speech isn't like I should be able to say whatever I want to say and no one's allowed to criticize me for it. Free speech is about saying the thing you want to say and not getting, murdered for it, like in countries that don't have free speech. But it's also about then other people having the free speech rights to be able to tell you you're wrong about stuff when you're wrong about stuff. The fourth is where things start to get truly personal. I'm concerned about the huge explosion in young women wishing to transition, and also about the increasing numbers who seem to be detransitioning, returning to their original sex, because they regret taking steps that have, in some cases, altered their bodies irrevocably and taken away their fertility. Some say they decided to transition after realizing they were same-sex attracted, and that transitioning was partly driven by homophobia, either in society or their families. I'm not going to touch that. I'm not going to touch it. 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 Most people probably aren't aware, I certainly wasn't until I started researching this issue properly, that 10 years ago the majority of people wanting to transition to the opposite sex were male. That ratio has now reversed. The UK has experienced a 4,400% increase in girls being referred to for transitioning treatment. Autistic girls are hugely overrepresented in their numbers. The same phenomenon has been seen in the US. In 2018, American physician and researcher Lisa Littman set out to explore it. In an interview, she said, quote, "Parents online were describing a very unusual pattern of transgender identification where multiple friends and even entire friend groups became transgender identified at the same time. I would have been remiss had I not considered social contagion and peer influences as potential factors." Littman mentioned Tumblr, Reddit, Instagram, and YouTube as contributing factors to rapid onset gender dysphoria, where she believes that in the realm of transgender identification, youth have created particularly insular echo chambers. Her paper caused a furore. She was accused of bias and of spreading misinformation about transgender people, subjected to a tsunami of abuse and a concerted campaign to discredit both her and her work. The journal took the paper offline and re-reviewed it before publishing it. However, her career took a similar hit to that suffered by Maya Forstater. Lisa Littman had dared challenge one of the central tenets of trans activism, which is that a person's gender identity is innate, like sexual orientation. Nobody, the activists insisted, could ever be persuaded into being trans. Okay, I'm going to pause it for a second. She's not done with this point, but I'm going to pause it. So, Lisa talks about how there was an unusual pattern of transgender identification where multiple friends and even entire friend groups became transgender identified at the same time. That is almost unequivocally untrue. It's a correlation, not a causation, right? So, I, as a bisexual person, I grew up in a really conservative part of Australia, which doesn't narrow it down. Most of Australia is pretty conservative unless you live in a big city. It was a fairly sort of insular right-wing echo chamber of a city, and I was lucky that I had someone like my mum, who was pretty left-wing and open-minded, that I even had, and even to an extent my dad, who, not getting into it, but as much as I don't like the man, he was always pretty good about sexuality stuff. He always said to me, it is okay if you like girls. It's never been a problem. I was lucky to grow up in a house like that. I went to a Christian private school for high school that I got into on a scholarship, and my group of friends at that time were people that I just liked, right? I just liked those people. I got on really well with those people. And it wasn't until like year 12, like 5 years into school, when we all sort of realized that the gay LGBT people had sort of accidentally bundled together. This is something that happens a lot. You sort of unconsciously gravitate towards the people who feel the same way as you on some kind of wavelength, whether it's tangible or not. And the theory that I came up with to explain that is that gay people, LGBT people, are comfortable in themselves and uncomfortable out in the world. For trans people, that's being comfortable with their gender on the inside and uncomfortable with how they present on the outside and how the world sees them. Whereas straight people, they're uncomfortable with themselves, but comfortable out in the world. Straight people, not all of them, but there is more of a a sort of rigid set of rules that a straight person feels the need to comply with as a straight person, whereas a gay person or an LGBT person or any kind of queer person, you sort of learn very early on that you don't agree with those rules because they don't fit in with your innate core self, right? That's been my theory. That's why I think I have unconsciously gravitated towards LGBT plus people everywhere I went. After high school, I did the same thing when I came back to the UK and I met people at uni. I did the same thing in my first job at Acosta. Like, all the friends I made at that job just happened to be the LGBT people. And that wasn't on purpose. I didn't see a girl across the room and go, she's a lesbian and she's mine. Hi, Haley. Hi, Abby. But that happened because that's how that works. You innately gravitate towards the people who you fundamentally feel on the same wavelength as. It's just a thing. That's how societies work. Okay, no, we're gonna move on from this because I'm taking too long on this point. But, like, you get what I mean, right? Okay, all right. The argument of many current trans activists is that if you don't let a gender dysphoric teenager transition, they will kill themselves. In an article explaining why he resigned from Tavistock, an NHS gender clinic in England, psychiatrist Marcus Evans stated that claims that children will kill themselves if not permitted to transition do not, quote, align substantially with any robust data or studies in this area, nor do they align with the cases I've encountered over decades as a psychotherapist. Let's just ignore the part of fact where transgender people are exponentially more likely to commit suicide than most of the rest of the population. Let's just push that aside for a second. If you don't let a gender dysphoric teenager transition, they will kill themselves. It's not even about, like, letting them transition, right? Like, I don't necessarily think that anyone should have life-altering surgery before the age of 18 because you've got a fuck ton of hormones. Like, I have severe anxiety and depression, right? But my mum was always really insistent and I didn't go on any medication for it before I turned 18 because my brain was still developing and it could have seriously fucked up my development somehow. I personally feel the same way about anything regarding any kind of surgery or medication. I think that everyone should be able to take it safely. Now, if as a teenager you get evaluated by a doctor and they can confirm that yes, you can safely, without any more harm to yourself, transition, I don't see why that should be a huge problem. That's my personal opinion. But if a teenager cannot safely transition and cannot or should not be in a place where you're pumping a bunch of chemicals into them because they're not fully, like, developed yet, then all you have to do to get around the if you don't let them do it, they'll kill themselves is talk to them about it. Tell them that you respect what gender they are, that you understand that they are that gender, but that they just need to wait a little while to transition for themselves. That there are so many things wrong with the way that she's phrased that. She's phrased it like trans teenagers are holding a gun on their parents and telling them that if they don't let them transition, that they'll kill themselves. Like, The writings of young trans men reveal a group of notably sensitive and clever people. The more of their accounts of gender dysphoria I've read, with their insightful descriptions of anxiety, dissociation, eating disorders, self-harm, and self-hatred, the more I've wondered whether, if I'd been born 30 years later, I might too have tried to transition. Oh my god! Hey, JK, I have anxiety, dissociation, self-harm, and self-hatred. I don't have gender dysphoria. The allure of escaping womanhood would have been huge. I struggled with severe OCD as a teenager. If I'd found community and sympathy online that I couldn't find in my immediate environment, I believe I could have been persuaded to turn myself into the son my father had openly said he'd preferred. No, you couldn't! That's not how this works! Okay, I had a horribly, emotionally abusive dad growing up. For 18 years, I lived under a man who consistently, emotionally wore me down to the point of I now have complex PTSD, anxiety, and depression because of it. That is how bad it was. I hated it. I was miserable almost all of the time, and I still am, despite the fact that I've been non-contact with him for nearly 3 years. At many points during that childhood, I thought about the fact that maybe if I was a boy and I was big enough, I could push back when he leaned over me and lifted his hand like this, right? Everyone who is in a smaller position like that thinks about the fact that maybe if they were in a bigger position, they could fight back. If they had more power, they could fight back. And in my little kid brain, it was like, if I could be a boy, I would. That seems easier. Because you know what? It fucking is easier. Not for everyone. Not every person's experience is the same. But on the whole, statistically speaking, being a white cisgendered male would be fucking easier. Almost every woman I know has had that thought at some point in their lives. I'm sure that trans women have also had the thought that if they stayed presenting as the gender that the world thinks they are, that things would be easier for them too, because that's how the world thinks. But that doesn't make that fact does not make you transgender. Thinking that you would prefer to be a man does not make you transgender. Gender dysphoria does, and the idea that you are a man inside does. Doesn't matter how much my dad yelled at me, screamed at me, emotionally abused me, manipulated me, hit me. At no point in that did I ever feel inside that I was a man. I'm so angry. When I read about the theory of gender identity, I remember how mentally sexless I felt in youth. I remember Colette's description of herself as a mental hermaphrodite and Simone de Beauvoir's words, quote, "It is perfectly natural for the future woman to and Simone de Beauvoir's words, "It is perfectly natural for the future woman to feel indignant at the limitations posed upon her by her sex. The real question is not why she should reject them, the problem is rather to understand why she accepts them." Yeah. That's nothing to do with being trans either. That's to do with the limitations imposed on our gender. That's supported the point I just made. Anyway. As I didn't have realistic possibility of becoming a man back in the 1980s, well, you fucking did, you just had to go looking. Anyway, it had to be books and music that got me through both my mental health issues and the sexualized scrutiny and judgment that set so many girls to war against their bodies in their teens. Again, this is a female issue, not a trans issue. We're moving on. Fortunately for me, I found my own sense of otherness, and my ambivalence about being a woman reflected in the work of female writers and musicians who reassured me that in spite of everything a sexist world tried to throw at the female body, it's fine not to feel pink, frilly, and compliant inside your own head. It's okay to feel confused, dark, both sexual and non-sexual, unsure of who you are. Yes! It fucking is! Every woman feels that. I can't... Oh my god. That's a gender thing! It's not a sex thing. That's a gender thing. That's to do with the gender constraints that it put on women. It's nothing to do with who you are. I want to be clear here. Oh, she wants to be very clear. I want to be very clear here. I know transition will be a solution for some gender dysphoric people, although I'm also aware through extensive research that studies have consistently shown that between 60% and 90% of gender dysphoric teens will grow out of their dysphoria. I'm not going to touch that one. Again and again, I've been told to, quote, just meet some trans people. I have. In addition to a few younger people who are all adorable. Oh, fuck you, you condescending piece of shit. Sorry. I'm trying to be objective. It's not working. I happen to know a self-described transsexual woman who's older than I am and wonderful. Although she's open about her past as a gay man, I've always found it hard to think of her as anything other than a woman, and I believe and certainly hope she's completely happy to have transitioned. Being older, though, she went through a long and rigorous process of evaluation, psychotherapy, and staged transformation. The current explosion of trans activism is urging a removal of almost all the robust systems through which candidates for sex reassignment were once required to pass. A man who intends to have no surgery and take no hormones may now secure himself a gender recognition certificate and be a woman in the sight of the law. Many people aren't aware of this. I don't even have the fucking words. The most misogynistic period I've experienced. Back in the 80s, I imagined that my future daughters, should I have any, would have it far better than I ever did. But between the backlash against feminism and a porn-saturated online culture, I believe things have gotten significantly worse for girls than the 80s? What planet are you living on? We're gonna roll through that, because that's fucking insane. Never have I seen women denigrated and dehumanized to the extent they are now. Oh, brother. From the leader of the free world's long history of sexual assault accusations and his proud boast of grabbing them by the pussy to the incel involuntary celibate, yeah, we know what that is, movement that rages against women who won't give them sex, to the trans activists who declare that TERFs need punching and re-educating. Well, that's just a fact. Men across this political spectrum seem to agree. Women are asking for trouble. Everywhere, women are being told to shut up and sit down or else. That has been all of human history, Joanne. For all of human history, women were being told to shut up and sit down or else. It's just that now those people are on Twitter, which means they have more of a voice. But also we're still on Twitter, so now we also have more of a voice. It's not that that stuff is new. It's that now it's out in the open, in public, you know, because of that free speech that you were talking about being really excited about earlier. I've read all the arguments about femaleness not residing in the sexed body and the assertions that biological women don't have common experiences, and I find them too deeply misogynistic and regressive. It's also clear that one of the objectives of denying the importance of sex is to erode what some seem to see as the oh, Jesus Christ, Joanne, learn to write a sentence. It's also clear that one of the objectives of denying the importance of sex is to erode what some seem to see as the cruelly segregationist idea of women having their own biological realities, or, just as threatening, unifying realities that make them a cohesive political... What does this have to do with politics? This is the thing that I find frustrating about this, is that anti-trans people so often, and I don't like to generalize, but they're so often on the right-wing end of the political spectrum. Same as, like, all lives matter people tend to be on the right-wing end of the political spectrum. And I don't understand why that is, because to me, it's not a political issue. It's a human issue. Like, Black Lives Matter, trans women are women, trans men are men, facts are facts, water is wet. Every time I read shit like this, I just think about that fucking HuffPost headlines. Like, I don't know how to tell you that you should care about other people. The hundreds of emails I've received in the last few days prove this erosion concerns many others just as much. It isn't enough for women to be trans allies. Women must accept and admit that there is no material difference between trans women and them. Yeah! Yeah, they fucking should. Women should accept there is no material difference between trans women and themselves. You know why? Say it with me, kids! 'Cause trans women are women. The more you know. Like... Ugh! Okay. But as many women have said before me, woman is not a costume. Oh my god. I'm gonna throw my fucking laptop. I'm sorry, did you just imply that trans women are using the concept of womanhood as a costume? I'm gonna fucking throw things! Tell me you didn't just fucking say those actual words. Oh my god! There are 2 more sentences that I can see that start with the word woman in air quotes, and I don't want to read them. Okay, alright. Woman is not an idea in a man's head. Woman is not a pink brain, a liking for Jimmy Choos, or any of the other sexist ideas now somehow touted as... What are you talking about? This is insane. This is the ramblings of a mad person. Moreover, the inclusive language that calls female people menstruators and people with vulvas strikes many women as dehumanizing and demeaning. Why? We are menstruators. And some of us aren't. And I just, like... Why? We are... Like... It's not that you're pointing out at people and going, hey, you with the tits, you with the vulva. 'Cause that would be fucking weird, Joanne. I understand why trans activists consider this language to be appropriate and kind, but for those of us who've had degrading slurs spattered at us by violent men, it's not neutral, it's hostile and alienating. Again! They're not yelling it at you from the street and wolf whistling at you in the... Like, think about the kinds of shit that those same degrading slurs, those same violent men would yell at trans people. Oh my good Christ, you were on the wrong side of this issue. In this situation, you were on the side of those violent men, so you can shove it all the way up your ass. Oh, finally, which brings me to the 5th reason I'm deeply concerned about the consequences of the current trans activism. Jesus Christ. I've been in the public eye now for over 20 years and have never talked publicly about being a domestic abuse and sexual assault survivor. This isn't because I'm ashamed those things happened to me, but because they're traumatic to revisit and remember. I also feel protective of my daughter from my first marriage. I didn't want to claim sole ownership of a story that belongs to her too. However, a short while ago, I asked her how she'd feel if I were publicly honest about that part of my life, and she encouraged me to go ahead. I'm already angry about this, but we're going to roll on through it and see what she has to say. I'm not going to use the voice anymore because we're talking about like a presumably a traumatic thing that went through her, so I'm going to drop the JK Tory voice. Okay. I'm mentioning these things now not in an attempt to garner sympathy, but out of solidarity with the huge numbers of women who have histories like mine who've been slurred as bigots for having concerns around single-sex spaces. I managed to escape my first violent marriage with some difficulty, but I'm now married to a truly good and principled man, safe and secure in ways I never in a million years expected to be. However, the scars left by violence and sexual assault don't disappear, no matter how loved you are, and no matter how much money you've made. My perennial jumpiness is a family joke, and even I know it's funny, but I pray my daughters never have the same reasons I do for hating sudden loud noises or finding people behind me when I haven't heard them approaching. I too have perennial jumpiness, and it was sort of joked about at my Costa job when I was at the back. There was a couple of guys that I used to work with, and every time they appeared at my side, I would either jump or I would take like big steps back from them, and it became like a running joke because obviously they didn't know why I was doing it, and they would make it fun. It became funny to them to try and get in my space just to make me jump, and I get that fear. But then she follows that up with, if you could come inside my head and understand what I feel when I read about a trans woman dying at the hands of a violent man, you'd find solidarity and kinship. I have a visceral sense of the terror in which those trans women will have spent their last seconds on Earth, because I too have known moments of blind fear when I realized that the only thing keeping me alive was the shaky self-restraint of my attacker. Which is exactly why the shit that you are saying is killing trans people. That reason. Because you are validating people that think like that, who are willing to hurt trans people on the basis of their identity. You are proving your own fucking... Okay. I believe the majority of trans-identified people not only pose zero threat to others, but are vulnerable for all the reasons I've outlined. Trans people need and deserve protection. Like women, they're most likely to be killed by sexual... Like women! Okay. Trans women who work in the sex industry, particularly trans women of colour, are at a particular risk. Like every other domestic abuse and sexual assault survivor I know, I feel nothing but empathy and solidarity with trans women who've been abused by men. So now you're saying trans women, but 2 sentences ago you said like women. So which is it, Joanne? So I want trans women to be safe. At the same time, I do not want to make natal girls and women less safe. When you throw open the doors of bathrooms and changing rooms to any man who believes or feels he is a woman, and as I've said, gender confirmation certificates may now be granted without any need for surgery or hormones, then you open the door to any and all men who wish to come inside. That is the simple truth. Presumably the reason why people are so afraid of men coming into like female bathrooms is because they think that men are going to somehow bring that sexual assaulty shit with them as well. First of all, trans people are in almost all cases, never, ever, 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 the sexual abuser or the domestic abuser. It's 99.9% of the time, it's the other way around. And I know that I just pulled that statistic right out of my ass, but it's right. That is the simple truth. It's not the truth, though. What man who identifies as a man, what man who thinks of himself as a man is going to get his gender changed on a certificate just so he could go into women's bathrooms and look at them? You know what's stopping men from going into women's bathrooms and looking at them who already want to do that? Nothing. There's no locks on the door. There's no guards standing outside checking gender every time you go in. If a man wants to go into a bathroom for ulterior, gross, or upsetting reasons, he can just fucking do that. And the kind of man who's gonna do that seems like he's not the kind of man who would change his gender to woman, because the kind of man who would do that seems to be, I don't know, denigrating to women. You know what I mean? Like, those two things don't really correlate to me. But we're moving on. On Saturday morning, I read that the Scottish government is proceeding with its controversial gender recognition plans, which will in effect mean that all a man needs to become a woman is to say he is one. To use a very contemporary word, I was triggered. Jesus Christ. ground down by the relentless attacks from trans activists and social media when I was only there to give children feedback about pictures they'd drawn for my book under lockdown. I spent much of Saturday in a very dark place inside my head as memories of a serious sexual assault I suffered in my 20s recurred on a loop. That assault happened at a time and in a space where I was vulnerable and a man capitalised on an opportunity. I couldn't shut out those memories and I was finding it hard to contain my anger and disappointment about the way I believe my government is playing fast and loose with women and girls' safety. I am sorry that you were sexually assaulted. And there's nothing that anyone can say that will fix that. Regardless of anyone's beliefs, I am sorry if they are sexually assaulted, domestically abused, injured for any unjust reason, because I have been there. But even if I hadn't been there, I would still feel empathy for that and be sorry for that. But you don't get that to use that as an excuse to shit on trans people. Because presumably, it wasn't a trans woman that sexually assaulted you. Presumably, that was a man. Late on Saturday evening, scrolling through a children's pictures before I went to bed, I forgot the first rule of Twitter: never ever expect a nuanced conversation, and reacted to what I felt was degrading language about women. I spoke up about the importance of sex and have been paying the price ever since. I was transphobic, I was a cunt, a bitch, a turf, I deserved cancelling, punching, and death. You are Voldemort, said one person, clearly feeling this was the only language I'd understand. You know what's really funny about that? I was on Tumblr yesterday and I read a big long post about why calling her Voldemort is not enough, because Voldemort is fictional and we need to get the point across to her that, like, this is nothing to do with, like, a fictional situation. This is a real thing that's affecting real lives. And yet for some reason, you are Voldemort is the thing that weirdly got through to her. Not got through to, obviously, because she still thinks she's right, because she's an idiot, but we're continuing. It would be so much easier to tweet the approved hashtags, because of course trans rights are human rights, and of course trans lives matter. Scoop up the woke cookies and bask in virtue-signaling afterglow. There's joy, relief, and safety in conformity, as Simone de Beauvoir also wrote. Without a doubt, it is more comfortable to endure blind bondage than to work for one's liberation. The dead, too, are better suited to the earth than the living. Scoop up the woke cookies and bask in a virtue-signaling afterglow. I have never hated a person as much as I hate you right now, and considering the fact that when I was being abused my whole childhood, your books were part of the thing that kept me going, that is really upsetting. Okay. I gotta move on. Numbers of women are justifiably terrified by the trans activists. I know this because so many have got in touch with me to— What do you mean justifiably terrified? What the fuck are you talking about? Okay, they're afraid of doxing, of losing their jobs or their livelihoods, and of violence. As with all situations, I don't believe it is a good thing to dox anyone, and I don't think it's a good thing to use an act of violence against anyone. However, if you are being openly transphobic and perpetuating this culture of hate against trans people loudly and publicly, then I think you should lose your job. And I don't think that that's a controversial statement to say. But endlessly unpleasant as its constant targeting of me has been, I refuse to bow down to a movement that I believe is doing demonstrable harm in seeking to erode woman as a political and biological class and offering cover to predators like few before it. What predators? I'm going to throw something. I stand alongside the brave women and men, gay, straight and trans, who are standing up for freedom of speech and thought and for the right and safety of some of the most vulnerable in our society, young gay kids, fragile teenagers, and women who are reliant on and wish to retain their single-sex spaces. I was a young gay, bi, kid, I was a fragile teenager, and I was a woman who is reliant on my single-sex spaces. And I think that you're wrong. I know that you're wrong. Polls show those women are in the vast majority and exclude only those privileged or lucky enough to have never come up against male violence or sexual assault. I've come up against both! So how about you shove it up your ass, Joanne? And who've never troubled to educate themselves on how prevalent it is. As someone who's experienced both, I'm well aware of how prevalent it is. It has nothing to do with trans people or gender. Nothing! The one thing that gives me hope is that the women who can protest and organise are doing so and they have some truly decent men and trans people alongside them. Political parties seeking to appease the loudest voices in this debate are ignoring women's concerns at their peril. In the UK, women are reaching out to each other across party lines, concerned about the erosion of their hard-won rights and widespread intimidation. None of the gender-critical women I've talked to hates trans people. On the contrary, many of them became interested in this issue in the first place out of concern for trans youth, and they're hugely sympathetic towards trans adults who simply want to live their lives, but who are facing a backlash for a brand of activism they don't endorse. The supreme irony is that the attempt to silence women with the word TERF may have pushed more young women towards radical feminism than the movement seen in decades. Oh my god. 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 That's such abusive language. That's so victim blamey. The last thing I want to say is this. I haven't written this essay in the hope that anybody will get out a violin for me. Fucking good. Not even a teeny weeny one. Wow, you're going to use language like that after you've spent 2,000 words shitting on a minority? Cool. I'm extraordinarily fortunate. I'm a survivor, certainly not a victim. I've only mentioned my past because, like every other human being on the planet, I have a complex backstory which shapes my fears, my interests, and my opinions. I never forget the inner complexity when I'm creating a fictional character, and I certainly never forget it when it comes to trans people. Wow, you never forget that inner complexity when creating a fictional character? Have you met Cho Chang? All I'm asking, all I want, is for similar empathy, similar understanding to be extended to the many millions of women whose sole crime is wanting their concerns to be heard without receiving threats and abuse. Okay. That's the end of that article. I've been recording now, full straight, without stopping, for 53 minutes. I'm assuming I'll edit it shorter than that to cut out the breaks for crying and the times when I just sort of yelled incoherently because I was so angry at the shit she was saying. But that's how long I've been recording for, to reply to a 2,000 word essay that she wrote trying to justify her transphobic bullshit. And I hate that she says TERF like it's a slur. It's not a fucking slur, it's what you fucking are. And also, I hate that the word radical is in there because I call things rad all the time. That word belongs to me, a bisexual. It does not belong to TERFs. I think a problem with becoming someone with a big platform is that once you get to the point where you feel you're beyond criticism, where you reach a point where you've hit the stratosphere and you've got millions of followers and you get hate all the time, I think a lot of the problem is that the hate starts to blend in with the real criticism, and then you just start equating those two things as the same. You can see similar examples of this portrayed by people like Gabby Hanna, either of the Paul brothers, although Logan seems to be surprisingly growing as a person, which is baffling to everyone involved. But when you reach that point, there must be like a blending of reality where you just assume that all of the criticism you're receiving is just blind hate, and you stop being able to separate those things because you're so used to receiving hate. And I understand that because that's your reality, that's how you live it. But also I think that you then need to have the forethought and the wherewithal to take a step back and think about it and realize that maybe those people screaming violent hate at you in the comments aren't the same people as the people who are trying to give you actual criticism that's level-headed and has points, like trans activists, like trans women who are women. I always think it's frustrating when people hate LGBT people or black people or indigenous people or people of color, any minority. I find it baffling, like, how does their identity affect you in any way? How does the amount of melanin in someone's skin, how does the fact that someone prefers someone of the same gender, how does that affect you? And you have made trans issues all about you and your fears, and that is not your place. I am terrified of so much, of men, of relationships, of intimacy, but I would never presume to project that out and say it's the world's problem. I would never say that because my dad spent 18 years ritualistically making me feel like nothing, that all dads are garbage. I would never say that because I have been grabbed, groped, assaulted, that all men are trash, unless I was joking. And yet, not only are you not saying that, you're somehow implying that the men who are men that assault people are all gonna just change their gender on their certificate just to assault women? just to get into female spaces? Honey, they're doing that anyway. They don't need a certificate to do it, and the kinds of men that are doing that aren't secure enough in their masculinity to decide to just change their name and certificate and do it anyway. That's not how that works. Your books raised me. I was in a really terrible situation, and more than once I considered suicide. More than once. It was a common thing, and sometimes it still is. And when I was a kid, Harry Potter and Doctor Who were the two things that kept me from going through it. Until I turned 12, I was convinced that I was going to get a letter to Hogwarts and I would be taken away from the horrible place that I was in, the way Harry was taken away from the Dursleys. It was my lifeline. As a young, queer kid who didn't yet know that she was queer, who was weird, with a weird accent in a country that she wasn't used to, with a dad she couldn't escape from, and a mum working 2 jobs, I had that. That was my lifeline. That was the thing that kept me going. And you know what? I can't speak for everyone, but I'm sure a lot of your trans female followers felt the same way. And you have just taken that away from people. Just because you don't have enough empathy to think about what you're saying before you say it. You've got sympathy, don't get me wrong. You've got sympathy, which is very condescending of you, by the way. But sympathy and empathy are 2 different things. And you don't have the second one. Trans women are women. Non-binary people are non-binary. Agender people are agender. Joanne Rowling is a fucking TERF.